And to discuss the topic, setting agenda for new CBN management, let's welcome a regular on this program, Uche Waleke, Professor of Finance and Capital Market, Nasarawa State University, and former Commissioner of Finance, Imo State. It's good to have you join us.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Nigeria.
And also joining us, but from our Lagos studio, Shaibu Idris, Managing Director, Timeline Consult Limited, a regular too on Good Morning Nigeria. It's good to see you.
Juma, good morning, Nigerians, and thank you very much for having me.
All right, and still from Lagos, but this time around via Zoom, is Dr. Moda Yusuf. Dr. Yusuf is the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, and former Director General, Lagos State Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you for coming up with us this morning.
Thank you very much and good morning.
And via Zoom too from Benin City, Edo State, is Oke Okechukwu. Oke Okechukwu is a professor of strategic management and human capital development. Dr. Okechukwu, welcome to Good Morning Nigeria today. To re-establish him so that we can speak with him. But once more, let's see whether he can hear us. Dr. Oke Okechukwu, good morning and welcome to the program. All right, gentlemen, welcome to the program. Where I believe, quite frankly, we're going to establish a link with him in the course of the program. But for now, let's kickstart the conversation with Professor Owaleke, who has a vast experience in this area. Now, Owaleke, for obvious reasons and of course for the benefit of our viewers, it is good to state this clearly. The primary role of CBN of any country is to provide the country with currency and price stability by controlling inflation. It also serves as a regulator. I can go on to mention that CBN is responsible for implementing monetary policy, managing the nation's currency, and controlling the money supply. But the mechanics involved in all of these responsibilities could be said to be the bane, of establishing solid monetary policy and fiscal policy for a buoyant economy. Historically speaking, we've had issues trying to balance all of this with the Central Bank of Nigeria, with successive governments in this country. So, Professor Waleke, now that's a new agenda, a new setting, administratively and otherwise. Central Bank is having a new management. Of course, we have a new president, who has, a special offer for Nigeria, according to what he has told us all this while. Now, where should be the focus of these new gentlemen who are going to occupy the highest positions in the Apex Bank of Nigeria?
Yeah, thanks so much. You started by mentioning, those areas of focus. Let me even begin by congratulating Dr. Yemi Cardoso and his team on their recent confirmation by the Senate. If you look at the Central Banks Act, CBN Act of 2007, the functions of the Central Bank are very clear. Section 2 of that Act, A to E, talks about maintaining monetary and price stability, talks about issuing legal tender, talks about maintaining the country's external reserve with a view to safeguarding the international value of the legal currency, which is our domestic currency. Okay. Also talks about maintaining a sound financial system, and the final one, banker to the government and advisor to the government. So these are the functions of the central bank as stipulated in Section 2, A to E of the CBN Act. So I expect the central bank governor to be guided by these, these functions, and by the other provisions in that CBN Act that are very critical for a successful, discharge of his duties. If you look at the previous, if you like, the previous, management of the central bank, one of the issues, that has come up, has been the non-observance, as it were, of some of the key provisions in that act. One of them is Section 50 of the CBN Act, which requires that the Central Bank of Nigeria should, after each financial year, at the 2 to 3 months after each financial year, transmit to the National Assembly and the President its audited accounts. So that has been an issue, over the years. The other one too also has to do with Section 38 of the CBN Act. Okay, what does that one say? It makes provision for temporary lending of the central bank to the government. It says whatever money that is being lent to the government must not exceed 5% of previous year's actual government revenue. The Ninth Assembly increased it to 15%. Again, it was observed that over time that was observed in the breach, which is why listening to the new CBN governor, okay, I was happy when he was talking about a shift in culture. He talked about having in place a culture of compliance. Culture of compliance means that the new team intends to comply and abide by whatever it's provided in our extant laws in the CBN, CBN Act. Okay, so that will go a long way in, of course, improving the confidence that people have in the central bank itself. And talking about confidence in the central bank itself, let me share an experience I had recently with some of my postgraduate students. Okay, I had asked them via phone to rate on a scale of 1 to 10, okay, their level of confidence in the ability of the central bank to stabilize the forex market. Okay, 68 of them were involved in that little survey that I did. And what was my finding? Okay, the mean rating that I got was 3, because I said on a scale of 1 to 10. So that tells me that at that time, okay, the level of confidence in the CBN was quite, was quite low. And remember too that the central bank also has a responsibility to implement not only the CBN Act, of course, comply with the CBN Act, but also implement the BOFIA, the Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act of 2020, yes. Okay, which talks about the duties of banks, the operations of banks, the books and records, and so on. Okay, so it's also the responsibility of this new team to ensure effective supervision of banks, which is also why I'm happy that the person there now also has a background of banking. People sometimes will argue that, I have had people argue that a central bank governor must not come from the banking sector. But there's a reason why that is an advantage, because of the BOFIA. In some other climes, yes, in some other climes, for example, the central bank is only responsible for monetary policy and not supervision, like in the UK, where you have the Financial Conduct Authority separate from the...
Exactly.
Okay, let me land.
Yes,
yes.
Professor.
So the point I'm making is that I think he is fit for purpose. The fact that he has a banking background is an advantage, because he's also saddled with the responsibility of supervising the banks, and you can't supervise banks when you have little knowledge of what they do.
Yes, and from what he has been able to achieve in Lagos State, is, he has been able to build on that. And now, he also said at the screening that it is important that we who are considered for this position today understand that this is a position of trust. With that comes a huge responsibility to meet up with the trust. I know that a lot of time and effort has gone into choosing the people who are standing here for nomination today. They've, they've been nominated and they've been sworn in. Let me bring in Shaibu Idris here. Based on what he has said, what is on the table for this new team? Because we've seen how CBN governors have left office not in a very palatable way because of some policies, because of corruption and all that. And President Ahmed Tinubu, in all his speeches, I'll be able to say he has to work on the economy, for the economy of Nigeria to work. Now they are in office. What is on the table for them here now to be able to rejig the economy and put the CBN back on the pedestal where it used to be before?
Very much, Jumai. Once again, good morning Let me align my thought initially with that of Professor Uche Uwaleke by also congratulating Dr. Yemi Kadoso and the other team members, particularly my younger brother Muhammad Sani Detijo. These are no best of times. So while we are congratulating them, probably this is not even the best word to use, because when you are an engineer, be you know, electrical, mechanical, civil, or what have you, and you are charged with rebuilding a community that is ravaged by earthquake or tsunami of a sort, you can only imagine the quantum of responsibilities bestowed on you. First, you need to clean the environment, you need to clean the wreckage, then you now begin to plan on how best to rebuild, you know, the lost structures, and. Now, Yemi is unfortunately in a terrible situation right now because he is inheriting an institution that has been completely decimated. This is an institution that used to be the pride of all of us. Everyone looks up to the central bank, but in the last 10 years or thereabout, the institution has been wrecked almost beyond, if you like, beyond economic repairs. But like fans of Chelsea will say, impossible is not a word that is in our dictionary. So Yemi and his team will definitely have a Herculean task to, you know, to rebuild the institution. And let me start with the mundane issues. Number one, Central Bank as it stands today appears to be excessively overstaffed. Unfortunately, the last administration of you know, Godwin Emefiele literally opened the gate for all sort of people, you know, to get into the central bank. The system, the process of distillation of recruiting quality materials to man the affairs of the monetary policy of this country was completely eroded. You know, politics was allowed to play in, you know, people of power and means were just nominating just anybody to be employed. And indeed, there were even insinuations that employment letters were being sold for people to join the central bank. Yemi Kadoso and his team needs to start with such mundane issues of checking and making sure that the team beneath him that will help him to achieve, you know, the objectives for which Mr. President has saddled him and his subordinates to deliver needs to be clean and clear. Glory be to God, Yemi, the much we know about him as a banker colleague, he's a very strong character person, you know, someone who is a very strong Catholic and a refined gentleman of a sort, you know, a man of character and honor. I see a possibility that he could even be having some challenges with the political establishment that have even appointed him, because he is a man of candor and he will definitely deliver the goods. Now, let's take a trajectory on after the mundane issues. I think Yemi should probably look at a three-pronged approach. What are the immediate things to be done? What are the short-term things to be achieved? And what are the medium terms and what are the long terms? Like I did say, in the short term, I think he needs to close all doors and windows of innuendos and excessive pressure and interference from outside. The oligarch, both in government and outside, needs to be checkmated, and they need to be told that it is no longer business as usual. It is now business unusual. This clear signal needs to be sent. In the short term, there is need to quickly review virtually all the currency swaps that were entered by the previous managers of our, foreign reserves. We do know that quite a number of those transactions must to be desired. We also need, I think the governor and his deputies need to quickly ascertain the level of, what exactly is our reserves, what are our assets. We now have a trust deficit on the figures bandied as our foreign reserve, somewhere around $37 billion versus the figure bandied by JP Morgan, somewhere around $3-4 billion. We need, an interrogation of that figure so that we know exactly where we are. Fast forward, the interventions done by central bank, the agri intervention, be it anchor borrower scheme or cards, commercial agricultural scheme, or the intervention in aviation, or the intervention in textile sector. In the first instance, it was a misnomer for the central bank to get involved into lending because the CBN lacks the internal capacity to assess such risk and be able to do the intervention. Now, central bank is exposed to the tune of over 3 trillion naira in various interventions. We have been told that about 60% of those debts, are now bad. This cannot and must not be allowed to be sustained. Yemi Cardoso must insist that those monies should be repaid because ab initio, quite a number of those loans were misdirected and they were not given to the right personalities. I think we also need to look at, the operations of Bofia, as Professor Uche Owaleke has said. Quite a number of the banks are excessively charging and overcharging customers. Now, if central bank is not in a position to supervise the deposit money banks, the earlier we go back to the National Assembly to ask for a segregation of the responsibility of central bank from monetary policies and supervision of the deposit money bank, i.e. to borrow from United Kingdom policy, we may need to do that because it does appear to me that the banks are allowed to get away with murder because the central bank appears to be either in a compromised position or incapacitated in making sure that it supervises the operation of these deposit money banks. Of course, Professor Uche Owaleke has touched on the major, factors or reasons why the central bank in any country is set up. Price mechanism they need to look at to make sure that inflation and interest rate are, close, because when and where you have inflation running almost at 30% and interest at just about 5, 10%, 11%, this is a disincentive to savings. So why should I save when I know that there is an armed robber by the side called inflation that will take out my money? And it is only the central bank that can work towards getting this done. I think finally it will be important for Yemi Cardoso to work in tandem with the finance minister. Glory be to God, they were both bankers, they were both commissioners under Ahmed Tinubu when he was governor of Lagos State. Even though Yemi only served for one term, they should be able to work symbiotically. The fiscal and monetary policies of the government needs to work in harmony. Otherwise, the economy may not be where we may want it to be.
We appreciate your opening comments this morning. We've actually touched on a very pertinent, items, with respect to this conversation. You talked about a misnomer, in the bank. There are many misnomers, if you ask me, on Nigerians, because one, I appreciate also the kind words, from you for the new CBN governor, whom we have described as an experienced person who's straightforward and all of that. Then you talked about symbiotic relationship, which has been lost over time in this country. Agencies don't want to collaborate. Agencies don't want to partner with each other to achieve a set objective. These are one of the key issues that you mentioned this morning that he should be aware of. Now, let me bring in Dr. Moda Yusuf, the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise and former Director General of the Lagos State Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So, no, the recessions, the nation navigated through since 2020 played a role in somehow destabilizing the already fragile economy at that time. Now, is the ripple effect, or are the ripple effects of these still prevalent in the nation's monetary system that could have led to the failure we are talking about now, vis-a-vis forming agenda for the new administration in the Central Bank of Nigeria? Now, the recessions impacted on economic ecosystems, spiraling energy expenditures, backlog of foreign exchange requirements that must be cleared, including debt services. I don't know the area I want to touch, but let's get your opening remarks this morning.
Yeah, thank you very much. And let me also join my colleagues in your studio to congratulate the new CBN governor and his team. Of course, we have had some challenges with the economy domestically and globally, which also dovetails into the recession that we talked about. We have been grappling with quite a number of structural issues, challenges around security and all of that, which has been affecting the economy. And of course, the central bank has a major role to play in all of this, in resetting the economy. And just as the new CBN governor said, the importance of collaboration between the fiscal and monetary authorities is something that is very critical to achieving success. For many of the macroeconomic challenges that we are faced with, the CBN cannot do the whole thing all by itself. It requires collaboration, and I think he did emphasize that. And to also support what has been earlier said, and again, the new CBN governor, alluded to it. The challenge of corporate governance and compliance was one of the biggest issues that we had over the last few years. Yes, there were global issues, issues with Ukraine, global energy prices, and all of that. But the situation was compounded by the quality of corporate governance at the central bank and, the quality of compliance. And I'm happy that he set out that as #1 agenda for him. Because if you don't have quality corporate governance, a whole lot of things will go wrong in any system. We have seen what has happened, for instance, with the Ways and Means, which led to a very embarrassing situation that a few weeks to the end of the administration, even the National Assembly was struggling with an outstanding over 23 trillion naira outstanding debt that was given to the government, which was not even appropriated for and had been spent. So that was a major infraction both on the Constitution and on the CBN Act. And I think both the executive and the CBN, of course, were culpable in this. Then, of course, we have seen all manner of issues, as has been said earlier, concerning the management of our foreign exchange environment. A whole lot of transparency issues happened, which also created quite a lot of confidence crisis, the management of our intervention funds and all of that. So, as he said, corporate governance, compliance issues are very, very critical to this. Now we are faced with a major confidence crisis in our foreign exchange market. If you talk to anybody around the economy today, that is perhaps the biggest issue. Yes, there were issues around, the global economy and all of that. But again, the lack of confidence in the market has compounded the problem. It has led to very profound speculative activities. It has, put a lot of pressure on our exchange rates and all of that. So restoring confidence is very key. And one of the very quick things that needs to be done is to clear the arrears, the backlog of obligations in the forex market. Because, yes, the president has been going around talking to foreign investors and all of that. But we will not achieve much value from that if we don't tidy up some very fundamental domestic issues. And one of these is the clearing of the backlog, because people will do their due diligence. If they talk to investors here and investors lament that their monies have been stuck in the Nigerian economy, how do we attract other people to come into the economy? So dealing with the crisis of confidence in the foreign exchange market is key. Clearing of the backlog is one major thing that we need to prioritize, although I know there is a challenge with even sourcing the forex. We can discuss that on how we can get out of it. And of course, also dealing with the issue of transparency in the management of the foreign exchange market. That is also very important. Because in the last dispensation, there was a whole lot of transparency problems around forex. There was a whole lot of corruption, unpredictability, and all of that. So we need to make the system a lot more transparent, and we need to avoid undue suppression of the market. That is also critical. If you suppress the market unduly, then the remittances will not come. Because as we speak, one of the quick wins that we can expect to show up the supply side is the remittances. And if you put obstacles on the way of remittances to the economy, then that will also further compound the problem. So we should look at it and possibly create a window within the banking system that will allow remittances to come in freely without any form of encumbrances, while we see how we manage the challenges in the R&A window. And of course, there's need to also deepen the financial system. As we talk now, the banking system or the financial system is not deep enough. And one of the metrics you use to determine the depth of the financial system is to look at the credit to the private sector as a percentage of GDP. Before now, it used to be about 12 to 15%. Right now, it's close to 20% of GDP. But when you compare that with what happens even within the sub-Saharan region, in sub-Saharan Africa, the average in sub-Saharan Africa is about 28%. The global average of credit to private sector as percentage of GDP is 145%. So we are yet to see a very, very good synergy or linkage or support from the banking system to support the economy. And that also manifests even more at the level of the small businesses. The small businesses account for over close to 50% of GDP. They account for less than 1% of the credit. In other climes, credit from the banking system supports the economy, they support consumer, they support purchasing power. But here, it's extremely very, very weak. So these are some of the issues, and of course, stakeholder engagement is also key. In the last dispensation, the stakeholder engagement was extremely weak. We had a situation where the CBN will just talk to stakeholders anyhow. There is no courtesy, nothing. I mean, nobody can run an economy without engaging the stakeholders. And I'm happy that Dr. Yemi Cardoso also emphasized that when he was interacting with the National Assembly, that he was going to engage with the stakeholders. Because it is through stakeholder engagement you can get quality input into the policy, that you can get quality feedback, that you can make the policy process more responsive and more inclusive. And finally, we should not see a situation where the central bank will be getting involved in partisan politics. That was the height of the embarrassment that we faced under the previous dispensation. He should distance himself and his team from partisan politics, because a CBN must be able to relate with any party that is in power. So we should avoid, because it's also put us on serious corporate governance. So these are some of the issues I think we need to highlight in terms of the agenda. Of course, there are other issues around financial efficiency and all of that, but you can come to that if you have time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Mudala. Yusuf, you've raised a lot of pertinent questions that I would like Professor Uche Waleke to look into. That is the transparency by the CBN to ensure that, carry Nigerians along to ensure that Nigerians know what is happening with the economy in the country. And there was talk about symbiotic relationship between the CBN and other sectors of the monetary policy. For talking about transparency, I still believe that the CBN already has structures on ground.
Yes,
to enable them.
Yes, even the CBN Act
yes.
also has provisions that enable transparency. By the Central Bank of Nigeria, sections 48, 49 of the CBN Act of 2007 speak to the issue of the Central Bank of Nigeria appointing an auditor. Section 48 says CBN is expected to appoint an auditor. Section 49 goes on to say that the accounts of the Central Bank should also be made available to the Auditor General, of the Federation. Okay. And I've also referred to Section 50, which says that the outcome of the audit report should also be transmitted to the National Assembly and the President. So I think all these are meant to ensure, transparency. Adequate disclosure is very, very, critical. Yes. So that's on the one part. On the side of collaboration, Jumai, we can't overemphasize the need for fiscal and monetary authorities, to collaborate. If you look at what even the Act says is the main function of the central bank, the primary mandate of the central bank, the maintenance of monetary and price stability. Okay, when we say price stability, we talk in terms of the three prices. What are these three prices? Inflation, exchange rate, and interest rate. Okay, our circumstances in Nigeria today do not allow the central bank to have firm control over these three. The central bank cannot, on its own, tame inflation in Nigeria. It will amount to clapping with one hand, and that is because of the factors driving inflation. If you listen to the new central bank governor, when he was addressing the National Assembly, he said that there is research evidence to show that 50% of what is causing inflation in Nigeria today, are caused by monetary factors. In other words, the Fiscal, a theory that says when you have increase in money supply, you also have, inflation. Okay, so what that means is that the other 50% is caused by non-monetary. Do you understand? Non-monetary means those are factors now that are in the domain of the fiscal authority. So if 50% is monetary, the other 50% is fiscal. Look at inflation rate today by the National Bureau of Statistics. The last month figure, printed at 25.8%. Now, out of this figure, food inflation, was reported at 29.8, close to just say 30%. Food inflation. Okay, so and if you look at the factors causing food inflation, what are they? The removal of fuel subsidy, contributed. The rising cost of transport, insecurity, that's also affecting people from going to farms. These are not factors that are within the control of the central bank. So they are exogenous to the central bank. What it means is that it is the fiscal authority that should handle insecurity. Yes. It is the government that should handle even transport. Okay, the energy cost, for example, because when you have high cost of energy, it will feed into the cost of goods and services. Yeah. So there is need to collaborate to tackle inflation. It's not just that of the central bank. Central bank can only handle the monetary aspect of it. Okay, the government should also handle its own side. Now that is inflation. The other price is exchange rate, which is just as has been mentioned, very, very more like the elephant in the room now. Okay, the exchange rate. Now, if you look at the forex market today, again, in my view, the central bank can only, at this moment, see how it can manage the demand side. because the exchange rate is a function of demand and supply, is a price determined by demand and supply. So it can only see how it can manage the demand side. On the supply side, there is very little it can do now because it doesn't print dollar. Central bank does not print dollar. Okay? Yes, it can try to incentivize people to, bring in dollars. But I'm saying in the immediate, all right, it is the work is more on the fiscal side.
Right.
Take the issue, a low-hanging fruit is this what we are losing by way of crude oil theft. Okay? The other day, OPEC released a report that what we are producing is 1.2 million barrels per day. If you also check the report by the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, it talks about 1.8 million barrels. So it's around 1.2 million barrels. Meanwhile, OPEC quota is 1.74 million barrels. So look at that gap, what we are losing, over 500,000 barrels in a day. In a month, it is 15 million. 15 million times $90 per barrel. Oil price today is above $90 per barrel. Even if we use conservative $90, you have over $1 billion. Multiply that by use your official rate, 765. You have over close to 1 trillion naira. So we are losing 1 trillion naira in a month. In dollar terms, over $1 billion. Imagine what $1 billion can do in the forex market by way of supply. So I'm saying it is the duty of the government to deal with crude oil theft.
Okay.
And that can be done. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So government has a role to play to fix the supply side of the forex market. The issue of attracting foreign direct investments, which I'm happy the president has been going about also trying to do. Okay, even though that's also a function of the local environment, the ease of doing business and all of that, including insecurity. But it's good that at least that they're going out to do that. Okay.
All right.
So that's also the duty of the government.
Professor.
So the central bank can only, as I said, for now, see how it can manage the demand side and reduce the pressure. And one way it can also reduce the pressure is something that has been mentioned. There is need to review the currency swap arrangements we have with China. Okay. Over the last 5 years, our imports from China has dominated our import. So it stands to reason, therefore, that you should try as much as possible to see how you can settle your transactions in the yuan to reduce the pressure on the dollar.
And
Professor Waleke, you are being professional about this, and that's why we find it difficult to pause you at a point. Very clear explanations there for those professionals who can have an understanding of what he's talking about. You're talking about money here, and it's a very serious business. Now, Okechukwu, Professor of Strategic Management and Human Capital Development, we've been struggling, to get through to you, and I'm happy that finally we are with you on this edition of the program. And now let's see what happened from your end, audio-wise. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the program.
Oh, great. Great. You are very clear here. I want to believe that you've listened to other guests one way or another. They've mentioned, exactly. A lot of items, came up here. Depreciation of the naira, inflation, exchange rate, interest rate. These are three fundamentals. We have financial efficiency, as they mentioned. Of course, the man in question, Mr. Kaduso, also said, look, there's going to be a shift in culture, and the culture of compliance we have to be brought into bear now. We also talked about the stabilization of the forex market and what have you. So let's get your first take on all of this, because of course the metrics of managing an economy of a nation that is not a manufacturing nation is very difficult, and that is why over the years we've had issues with Central Bank of Nigeria managing the economy properly. I don't want to go back to history, but we all know that, look, if Central Bank had been doing its bidding, so all this while, they would have also, of course, by now not be talking about a new agenda or agenda for the new CBN management.
Yes. Well, the first observation I'd like to make is that it is not the business of the economy. For the CBN has a role in the economy. So when too much is expected from a bank, from a central bank, because the environment is unclear, sometimes the bank gets unfair bashing. The second point I'd like to make is that the bulk of the crisis of the last 8 years, and so the state of the former governor, derived from the political economy of the government. Now, if you look at the governor and his team, you can't accuse them of incompetence or insanity or illiteracy, but you can see that much of the decisions that should have been extreme were interfered with by the politics and politics environment. So once we locate that crisis, where it came from and how it affected us in the last 7-8 years, maybe the new governor has to clearly from day one know that the greatest danger threatening him is not the value of the naira, is not fiscal policies, is the possibility of his tenure being marred by some tangential interventionists who may not understand the issues, who on their own cannot actually readily distinguish between fiscal and monetary issues, but who believe they are competent enough to tell the CBN what to do. So that is the point to note there. The other thing, of course, is that it is his business after the last couple of years to do everything that will advance the credibility of the CBN in public consciousness, such that when the CBN speaks, people will think of information integrity. That challenge came up. I had the remarks about how stakeholders were handled. Certainly, I don't expect he will do that. But what imagine all of that, even the handling of stakeholders and some policy issues, is that there was an influence almost taking the form of terrorism, wherein this people seem to trembling. And now that is only erupted, the impression exists that, he came from one source, there was somebody there who did this. People must know that it was a cause of mischief that plunged to what has led it to where he is now, and that he is sitting on his throne, he has a duty to rescue and make credible. The other thing is, he has to also focus on
Professor Okechukwu, the glitches we're having are actually sticking, and we're having a difficulty, hearing you very clearly. We have a muffled audio there from your hand. We hope something can be done before we round off this edition of the program. But of course, we appreciate the comments that we were able to hear. And so thank you for that. Now, let's once again return to Shaibu Idris, Managing Director of Timeline Consult Limited, who is with us in our Lagos studio. Shaibu Idris, you also touched on very pertinent areas which I wouldn't like us to go back to. So let's pick something that is specific now. For instance, the issue of naira depreciation. Let's talk about that. So you can also air your views about what Mr. Cardoso has to do. Now, the economy has adversely, no doubt, been affected by unabating depreciation of the naira, and this is largely because, of course, we are not a producing nation. And despite the unification measures adopted by the current administration, naira is still facing a free fall in the parallel market. Now, the exchange is slightly 772 at exchange window, and of course over 1,000 or thereabouts at the black market. Now, how should this team begin to view depreciation of naira, and what should be their strategy?
Your question is a $1 billion question, and it's difficult, in few seconds or few minutes to provide a solution to a problem that has been like a cancer to our society. Kirian, you and I and listeners as well as fellow discussants will agree with me that some 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 1 naira was almost equals to $1, if not even much more than $1. As at that time, what was the parallel market rate. Let's even limit the conversation to when President Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida introduced the second tier foreign exchange market under the then structural adjustment program, popularly called as SAP. 1 naira in the official market was equivalent to about $1. But in the parallel market, it was somewhere around 2 naira 50 kobo, 3 naira 50 kobo, or thereabout. And when you juxtapose that in a moment, you realize that the differentials between the official exchange rate and the parallel market rate was somewhere around 250, 300%. Now, fast forward, what are we experiencing today? The figures you've just, given, 770 naira official exchange rate, maybe 1,000 naira the parallel market exchange rate. What is the difference? The difference is somewhere around 250 naira, 300 naira. It's still less than 50% of the differential as I espouse it historically. Is that bad? Yes, it is bad. Indeed, it is terrible. Should the central bank continue to chase this shadow of making sure that the rates, are aligned? It is near impossible for the central bank to continue to do that. Why? Because markets, there are several factors that determine prices. Apart from demand and supply, there are other factors such as confidence level in the market. Right now, we have a situation where, trust deficit as to the Central Bank of Nigeria's capacity to even manage our monetary policy is at its lowest ebb. Professor Uche Owaleke has shared a small, survey that he did. He shared that with us, at one fora that we had, and clearly that is a reflection of the larger society. There is a magnificent trust deficit on the ability of the Central Bank of Nigeria to manage, the monetary policies. Now with Cardoso and his team, we do expect that, number one, he is a man of strong character and strong will. Professor Ikechukwu has alluded to the fact that exogenous factors that will want to be interfering with what Yemi can do, he needs to be careful that those are the greatest issues. Now, a number of us, many Nigerians, just everybody wants to be an economist. Everybody talks about how to manage the naira, how to manage the economy, when people don't even know what are the intricacies of the factors needed to consider in managing the economy. Dr. Muda Lawal alluded to the issue of corporate governance. I think it is also important to realize that as long as we want a reasonable level of valuation of our currency, we need to be transparent, we need to be reasonable, we need to be accountable. Uche Owaleke did allude to the fact that there is a provision in the CBN Act that says there should be an external auditor appointed, and the auditor should review the books of accounts and render, reports to the Auditor General of the Federation. We've had a central bank run over 3-5 years without external auditors' accounts. Where were the senators who are supposed to have the oversight function of making sure that the central bank is run professionally? Where was the Auditor General? Where were other government functionaries that should have had, a rein to call on Emefiele and his team to order so that this could be done? Now, back to the question on exchange rate. To my mind, not just my mind, based on economic fundamentals such as the purchasing power parity theory of valuation of currencies, I believe Nigeria's naira should be somewhere, its value should be somewhere around maybe 650, at worst 800 naira. 1,000 naira is certainly not the valuation of our currency as at today to a dollar. And the reason why you have this, wide gap is perception. And perception, unfortunately, creates reality. We have JP Morgan that says, our foreign reserve is somewhere around $3.5, $3.7 billion. We have forward transactions that we have entered for which the central bank has defaulted already in excess of $10 billion. So if we were to meet those forward transactions, we are still not able to cover the transaction. One of the quick gains, the low-hanging fruit that Cardoso and his team needs to do is to ensure that they quickly engage with the parties for which we have had those forward contracts, so that we can rewrite the contract in a better terms and have a breathing space, and we will then be able to enhance the value of our currency. Unless that is done, I'm afraid, the depreciation will continue, because the market runs on perception, not just the reality.
So much for, elaborating further on the question that Kieran asked you, and we are sure when we come back from this break, we'll be able to address the independence of the CBN and ensuring that it brings back the credibility of the Central Bank of Nigeria. We'll be right back.
In a nation rich with culture, diversity, and resilience, we come together to celebrate a significant milestone. On the 1st of...
You're welcome back, and this is still Good Morning Nigeria. As we begin to round up, we still have our guest in the studio. Let me bring in Dr. Muda Yusuf. Dr. Muda Yusuf, you've listened to Shaibu Idris, Uche Waleke, and our guest, Oke Ikechukwu, whose audio was not good, but they've raised a lot of issues concerning the independence of the CBN. And the CBN governor, while addressing the Senate, also said that the Apex Bank will truly act independent of external control. He also assured that the CBN would be insulated from external and political pressure under his leadership during his screening by the Nigerian Senate. How can we ensure that the CBN is independent and ensure credibility here? Because all of Nigerians are watching and expecting that there should be change.
Well, I agree with the other speakers. Political pressure on the central bank is one of the biggest risks, to the stability of the financial system. And it takes a very, very strong character to be able to resist those pressures. Yes, Mr. Dr. Yemi Cardoso has assured us that he will not allow those pressures to influence his role as a central bank or to affect its independence. We hope and pray that he will be able to resist such pressures, because sometimes these things are easier said than done. Because I know that in a democratic environment, a whole lot of those pressures will be mounted on him. So I think it's a function first of the disposition of the president to give the central bank some space, to manage the monetary policy environment. And it's also a function of the quality of the character that occupies that position. Because if you have somebody who is always willing to please the president, the feeling of the president at whatever cost, then we run the risk of compromising the independence of the central bank. Of course, the laws are there to preserve the independence, and we also need to, at some point, get the judiciary to make very clear pronouncements on the boundaries, of the president vis-a-vis the central bank, because we have seen a lot of debate about suspension, whether the president has a right and all of that. But that will require an interpretation, by the judiciary. So the structures are there, but what will make the difference is the personalities that are involved and the capacity of them to be able to stand their ground and ensure that the independence is preserved. And having said that, let me quickly also highlight some very critical things by way of agenda setting. We need to also begin to quickly look at the recapitalization of the banks, because you need to have a solid capital base to be able to support the stability of the system. The current minimum capital base of 25 billion was set in 2004. We're in 2023. There has been massive erosion of that capital base. At that time, the capital base of 25 billion was an equivalent of about 187 million US dollars. Today, it's an equivalent of just about $33 million. So the capital base needs to be strengthened quickly to support the banks and to allow the banks to be able to match the exposures that they are carrying presently. So that is very important going forward to ensure the stability of the banking system. I'm aware that some banks have actually moved up significantly, but we need to set the baseline, for the capitalization. Then it's also important that we suspend indefinitely for now the Naira redesign policy. Because what we heard from the president at the beginning of, I think, the administration was that this has been rescheduled to December or so. In view of the disruption that the Naira redesign created in the economy, and in view of the very little value proposition that it is bringing to the economy, I think we should suspend it indefinitely. It's not a critical issue at this point, so we need to deal with that. Then we also need to look at the issue of interest rate spread. Interest rate spread is the difference between deposit rate and lending rate. The interest rate spread in Nigeria is one of the highest globally. It's over 20%. In sub-Saharan average, the sub-Saharan average is about 10%. Global average is just about 6.6%. So we need to look at this, also a reflection of the efficiency of the banking system. We also need to look at the tenor of funds within the banking system. Currently, cumulatively, there is a great mismatch, negative mismatch in tenor between the liabilities and assets in the financial system. Again, that is not good for the stability of the financial system. So between the monetary authorities and the fiscal authorities, we need to look at it. Because as of 2021, there was a negative mismatch of over 40 trillion. In other words, when you have a banking system that has close to 90% of its funds in the banking system, deposit liabilities of just maturity of 1 year and below, it's about 90%. So the bulk of the funds in the banking system, or in the financial system, are short-term funds. And many of these funds are being lent long-term, which is leading to a very serious mismatch. Again, between the monetary and fiscal authorities, we need to see how we can create the environment so that we can see a better match in tenor. We can improve the maturity of funds in the banking system so that the banking system can support much longer, tenor investments, long-term projects. Right now, that cannot happen because close to 90% of funds in the banking system are less than 1 year tenor. So these are fundamental issues that we need to also deal with in terms of strengthening the financial system and the banking system going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Muda Yusuf. We are pausing you now for a short while as we're trying to manage the rest of the time that we have allotted to this edition of Good Morning Nigeria. Let's come back here again where we have Professor Uwaleke. Well, we've had other speakers a while ago. There's this word, that was used by Okechukwu. He said, tangential interventionists. And I went further to understand the word better, to say, look, this is just a kind of a communication disorder coming from persons who are not even professionals, but have influence on people in authority positions. For instance, in intervention, meaning some persons, perhaps those who were responsible for appointing Cardoso, who said, after all, I played a role in all of this, do this for me, I'm an importer, this exchange stuff and so on. And you are losing your independence gradually without even knowing that. That has also happened to some ex-CBN governors. Now, how would CBN really be independent? We are trusting Mr. Cardoso. Personally, his appearance showed some kind of candor. There's this kind of, the demeanor that he has, even in appearance, meaning that he's a serious-minded human being. Well, those years growing up, we say a sound mind in a sound body.
Yes.
All right. Now, somebody talks about trust deficit. That's a Schreiber Idris. Trust deficit. That is to say, look, wherever nothing good comes from from Central Bank, so to speak, and so on. So how can Cardoso and team, come against it? Because you know what, the other staffers of Central Bank are still there. Yes. The persons who work to the other teams are still there. Yeah. These are career personnel who know the tricks, the pros and cons of the place, who are into corruption, who are into all manner of deals in the Central Bank of Nigeria. And again, Cardoso may not have the right to start sacking people, but he has to work with them. So how will he maneuver this or navigate through this complex situation in a complex bank like Central Bank of Nigeria?
Yeah, thanks so much, Kiran. When people talk about competence, it's not just about academic qualification, it's not just about professional qualification, it's not just about experience, but it's even more about character. And a lot of people are testifying that he is somebody that Nigerians can trust. Even the president, I think, once joked that while he was a commissioner in his cabinet, that he always exhibited independence of character. Yes. I think that they nicknamed him the headmaster.
Headmaster. And that was even during the campaign.
Yes, and that was because anything that was not in the budget, he was commissioner for economic planning and budget. So anything that was not in the budget that was brought, he would strike it off and say, it was not, there was no head for it. So they now nicknamed him headmaster. So the point I'm making is that it would appear that he is somebody of a strong character, and is also that kind of person that we also need, in the central bank. And talking about central bank independence, again, the CBN Act has some provisions to ensure that the central bank is independent. Again, I go back to the Act. Section 6 of the Act, all right, talks about the board. It's only the central bank that you can find the chief executive also acting as a chairman of the bank. I once wrote an article that was published in Business Day. I titled it "The Central Bank and the CEO Duality." Okay, it's a very important principle in corporate governance, that the CEO is not also meant to be the chairman of the organization, but in the central bank, the CEO, who is the CBN governor, is also the chairman of the board, in line with Section 6 of the CBN Act, that says there has to be the CBN governor is the chairman, the 4 deputy governors are also members, 5 directors, permanent secretary, Minister of Finance, and the accountant, the general. So these are members of the board, and the central bank governor is the chair. Now he's also the chairman of the MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee, Section 12. Again, talks about Monetary Policy Committee of 12 members, where the CBN governor is the chair. He's also the chairman of the Bankers Committee. Okay, so he is a powerful person, and those powers, okay, should confer, some level of independence. He should be able to assert himself, and that's why the CBN Act gives him such powers. But again, I also want to note that it's also important that he democratizes decision making in the central bank. Okay, he shouldn't take advantage of the fact that he has so much powers and then be taking decisions all alone. And I was happy to listening to him when he said he will be engaging stakeholders. Yes. These stakeholders, of course, will involve the banking community. Remember, the bankers committee is the chairman. Okay, it should also involve the academic community. The CBN governor should be able to also liaise with the academic community and get inputs from the community. And he was also saying that the kind of banks he wants to see now is a data-centric bank. okay, and that his policies will be evidence-based. Okay, such evidence should not just come from the bank itself, but also from the academic community. So I want to advise him to work with the academic community, to work with CIBN, to work with the Chartered Institute of Stockbrokers, where he's a member, to work with the Nigerian Bar Association, Nigerian Economic Society, Nigerian Economic Summit Group, okay, and of course ICANN and ANAN. So he should work with these bodies to ensure that he succeeds. One other advice that I have for him is has to do with the the monetary policy itself. Remember, the MPC meeting for September was postponed, okay, and I want to advise him to, of course, as soon as he settles down, to fix that meeting, because they need to meet at least 6 times in a year. So in that meeting, MPC should also consider pausing or halting this monetary policy tightening, because just as has been pointed out, it is not helping access to credit. When you have high interest rates in an economy, access to credit becomes difficult. The issue of credit, the credit to the private sector, will also not improve when you have high interest rates. So he should pause monetary policy tightening and consider, an accommodative policy that will support, GDP growth rate.
Course, yeah.
So that's important. And again, too, if you look at our cash reserve requirement, it's one of the highest in sub-Saharan Africa. Our cash reserve requirement is 32.5%. 32.5%. And yes, and it is choking. It is choking the banks. So it is good that the MPC, okay, they take a second look at the cash reserve requirement with a view to reducing it. And as I said earlier on, interest rates, MPR of 18.75% is on the high side. That should also come down, because there's evidence to show that these rates have not, over time, the more you tighten them, the more inflation.
Exactly.
Yes. So the central bank should, consider other means, other tools at its disposal in fighting inflation outside of, continuously tightening the MPR.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Uche Owaleke. Let's, as we're beginning to round up, let's bring in Shaibu Idris now. Shaibu Idris, you've listened to Professor Uche Owaleke and Muda Yusuf. I would like to have your opinion briefly as your last word on the Naira design policy. Do you agree that it should be suspended indefinitely?
Even when it was introduced, we did discuss here that it was ill-timed, and the financial implications of doing so was enormous, and this country is not in a position to afford such financial aggrandizement as far as we are concerned. So I do align my thoughts to Dr. Muda Yusuf that it should be suspended indefinitely until much later time when things would have settled down. But just quickly, 2 issues. Number one, Professor Owaleke, apart from the central bank governor who is the chair of the board, also Federal Inland Revenue, the chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue is the chief executive. So there are quite a number of 1, 2 or more parastatal of government where the chief executive is also doubling as chair of the board, which in current corporate governance parlance is an anomaly. We frown at that. I have been the chairman of the IOD Center for Corporate Governance, and we've had discussion along those lines. Again, quickly, Karen did mention something like, Cardoso is inheriting a staff that of central bank that are somewhat tainted. I want to disagree with that. If you like, if there is a train derailment, when eventually you get the coach back on the train, on the rail, will you say remove the rail and replace the rail? No. The institution of central bank has been there for years. Godwin Emefiele was there for just about 8 years or even 7 years. He met creme de la creme of quality staff. that can still be useful, and they are still intelligent, and they have the culture. The fact that they were derailed does not necessarily mean that, the head that comes in and said, let's look at this, they will not come back to where they need to be. So I think we need to be there. Then finally, just quickly, Professor Oke was saying was tangential intervention. It was not just tangential, it was direct. There were people who were not even in government that were issuing instructions to Godwin Emefiele. So it was direct intervention, and we must stop that.
All right, thank you indeed. Actually, when I was talking about the staff, because we know, for instance, like when we have ministers in this country who come from a political background, and when they come to the ministry, they meet career people. But Nigerians believe that these career people are even the people that corrupt the ministers, because they are able to show him the tricks, the pros and cons, how you can maneuver and manipulate and stuff like that. We are Nigerians, and we know ourselves.
Yes.
What we're saying is that, look, these staff should not begin to corrupt the mind of the new man to say, look, we did this in the past, and it worked for us, so let's go back to that. That's what I'm saying. But if he has that, strong character to say no to that, fine. But he's going to have that kind of issue.
Yes. Uche Oleke, on this 1 second, you said.
Yes, but before Uche will come, remember that.
Just a follow-up to what.
2 seconds, because more than
yes, it's just to say, when I talked about chairman and CEO, I was making reference to government-owned enterprises. The central bank is set up with a capital base of 100 billion. That's not the same with the FIRS.
Okay,
Central bank is also expected to, remit surplus to the government. Again, that's not the same with FIRS.
Okay, let me stop you. I think what I understood from him is this. It's just a setting, whether it's central bank or whatever agency that it is, that one man should not be CEO and chair of the board, irrespective of the structure
that
we're
is
talking
total
about now.
control.
Exactly, total control. So that's when, now I want to ask Muda Yusuf.
He's off the...
Muda Yusuf is off.
Yeah.
All right, sorry about that. But as a matter of fact, what I wanted Muda to do is to say, look, is there too much power bestowed on the CBN governor? Is that too much power? Should he be divulged? Should he be divulged to make it easier for him to operate?
No, that's the point I'm making. No, those powers are essential to maintain the independence of the central bank governor.
Yes.
And one other quick thing I want to add is on the issue of bank recapitalization. I support bank recapitalization, but it should not be regulatory induced. Okay, banks should be encouraged to recapitalize on their own, but it shouldn't be, by way of regulation. The central bank can use incentives to do that. BDCs also need to be recapitalized to reduce their number, because BDCs are too many in number.
Yes, indeed. I'm sure in a while, maybe after some time, we'll be able to come back and, talk about when they are fully in office and they are functioning, so that we can be able to set more agenda for them. Professor Uche Owaleke, Professor of Finance and Capital Markets, Nasarawa State University, and former Commissioner of Finance, Imo State. As usual, appreciate your input.
Thank you, Jumai.
Shaibu Idris, Managing Director, Timeline Consult Limited. Thank you. And Dr. Muda Yusuf, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, and former Director General, Lagos State Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We also thank him for his contribution. And Oke Ikechukwu, Professor of Strategic Management and Human Capital Development. Thank you so much for your short contribution. We're so sorry for the network that was not able to give you the opportunity to tell us what you think and set the agenda for the CBN governor and his team. Thank you so much for coming and watching Good Morning Nigeria today. It's been a pleasure. I am Jumwe. Yes.
And I am Kiri, and you might see you again tomorrow. Have a great day.